The dawn of December 27, 1942, crept slowly across Port Moresby, New Guinea. Its light filtered through humid mist and the lingering smoke of war. On that morning, 2nd Lieutenant Richard Ira Bong climbed into the narrow cockpit of his P-38 Lightning, ready for his first encounter with the enemy. His heart was steady, his breath measured, but within him stirred the awareness that the day would change everything. For a year, the Japanese had dominated the Pacific skies. That dominance was about to end. Through the canopy's curved glass, Bong saw them 40 Japanese aircraft breaking through the clouds like a living storm. Bombers escorted by Mitsubishi A6M0s, the same fighters that had haunted Allied pilots since Pearl Harbor. Against them, only 12 American P-38s rose to intercept. It should have been a massacre. But among those 12 Americans flew a quiet farm boy from Wisconsin whose name would soon send tremors through Japanese air commands from Rabaul to the Philippines. The balance of air warfare was about to shift not through the machines themselves, though the twin-engine Lightning was ahead of its time, nor through tactics alone, but through the emergence of a single pilot whose rare mix of natural instinct, methodical calculation, and unyielding nerve would rewrite the equations of aerial combat. On that humid morning over Major Richard Bong began his transformation from student of flight to master of the Pacific skies. That day, Bong achieved 2 confirmed kills, first a 0, then a Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar. The official citation that awarded him the Silver Star could not capture what the Japanese pilots had witnessed. Decades later, from captured Japanese reports, a single paragraph told the truth. The American twin-engine fighters attacked with coordination unseen before. One pilot, in particular, used his speed and altitude with precision beyond anything we had encountered. From farm to flight, to understand that moment, one must return to September 24, 1920, in the quiet farmlands near Poplar, Wisconsin, where Bong was born, the eldest of 9 children to Carl and Dora Bong, Swedish immigrants who prized hard work above all else. Their lives were humble but structured, the kind that built discipline without ever naming it. When Bong was 8, something extraordinary happened. President Calvin Coolidge vacationed in Superior, Wisconsin, and the mail planes servicing his retreat roared directly over the Bong farm. Watching those biplanes streak across the summer sky, young Dick felt destiny ignite. From that day, he would later write, "I knew I was going to fly." He built model airplanes from scraps of wood and paper, devoured every aviation magazine he could find, and absorbed the discipline of farm life rising before dawn, working with precision, patience, and persistence. In school, he was an all-around achiever, top 10 in a class of over 400, athlete, hunter, choir, singer. The skills he honed: keen eyesight, measured timing, quiet confidence would one day keep him alive. In 1938, Bong entered Superior State Teachers College to study engineering, but soon joined the civilian pilot training program. On his 20th birthday, he soloed in a Piper Cub, his instructor noting the young man's extraordinary spatial awareness, the innate ability to visualize angles, speeds, and distances in motion. By May 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, Bong enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. At Luke Field, Arizona, one of his instructors was Captain Barry Goldwater, later a U.S. Senator. Goldwater would never forget him. Bong was the most naturally gifted pilot I ever met. His gunnery precision exceeded our best instructors, but his mind was the thing. He analyzed every mistake until it became knowledge. Another instructor, an unnamed Czech, offered a prediction that proved prophetic. There is no escaping Bong. He will always find your tail. Even in slower aircraft, he could maneuver into positions other pilots considered impossible. By January 1942, Bong earned his wings and commission as 2nd lieutenant only, weeks after Pearl Harbor thrust America into war. His exceptional shooting scores kept him stateside as a gunnery instructor, a posting that frustrated him deeply but refined his tactical thinking. He didn't just teach pilots to shoot, he taught them to understand the geometry of flight. Mastering the Lightning in May 1942, Bong transferred to Hamilton Field, California, to train on the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, a revolutionary twin-engine fighter armed with a 20mm cannon and 4.50 caliber machine guns, all concentrated in its nose. The design, unconventional and complex, intimidated many. It thrilled Bong. The Lightning could reach 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climb like a rocket, and range farther than any single-engine fighter in the Pacific, a machine made for distance, speed, and power. But its handling quirks made it dangerous in unskilled hands. The cockpit was cramped and poorly heated. The controls grew heavy at high speeds. Bong didn't just adapt, he studied the aircraft like a scientist, learning its limits, memorizing its responses. His boldness occasionally went too far. On June 12, 1942, he buzzed a fellow pilot's house so low that the propeller wash scattered wedding decorations. Days later, he flew down Market Street, San Francisco, at rooftop level, blowing laundry off clotheslines in Oakland. For his trouble, he earned a personal reprimand from General George C. Kenney of the 4th Air Force. Yet, Kenney's scolding came with an odd compliment. "If you didn't have the spirit to fly down Market Street, I wouldn't want you in my Air Force, but don't ever do it again." Kenney recognized what he saw, the fearlessness and skill that defined a born combat pilot. When General Douglas MacArthur appointed Kenney commander of the 5th Air Force in the South Pacific, he chose 50 of his best pilots to go with him. Bong was on that list. By September 1942, both men arrived in Australia, ready to confront Japan's air supremacy head-on. Baptism of fire. Bong's combat baptism came while temporarily attached to the 39th Fighter Squadron under Captain Thomas Lynch, one of the Pacific's rising tacticians. Lynch drilled into his men the hard truth: never try to turn with a zero. The Japanese fighter could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew, but it lacked armor and speed. The new doctrine was simple: use altitude, dive fast, fire briefly, climb back, out-hit hard, and vanish. Bong absorbed these lessons and refined them. He treated every fight as a mathematical puzzle, calculating deflection, speed, and firing angles until each burst of gunfire became inevitable precision. Then came December 27, 1942, the day destiny arrived. 12 P-38s met 40 Japanese aircraft over Buna, outnumbered more than 3 to 1. Bong and Lynch dove into the attack. Bong's first burst shattered a zero mid-air. Seconds later, he evaded a swarm of pursuers by skimming treetop level, so low that leaves brushed his wings. 2 of his pursuers crashed trying to follow. He then lined up on a Valdive bomber, firing point blank until it exploded in flame. When Bong landed at Port Moresby, his aircraft was nearly out of ammunition and fuel. He had 2 confirmed kills and a silver star on the way. But what mattered more was the shift in perception. Japanese pilots had met an American who fought like no one before, who refused to play their game. Over the next weeks, Bong's legend grew. By January 1943, he was an ace. By April, a double ace. Each mission honed his mastery of the lightning and his understanding of the enemy. He learned altitude was survival, patience was a weapon, and discipline not bravado on battles. When he wasn't in combat, he was taking new pilots into the air, showing them how to dive with the sun at their backs, fire short, lethal bursts, and never, ever slow down for a dogfight. His lessons were simple, direct, and life-saving. By the spring of 1943, First Lieutenant Richard Bong had become both a mentor and a menace, the quiet Midwestern farm boy who was turning the Pacific skies into his classroom. The summer of 1943 marked the turning point, not only in the Pacific Air War, but in the legend of Richard Ira Bong. By July, he was no longer simply a promising young pilot. He had become a phenomenon. The humble farm boy now commanded respect among comrades and fear among the enemy. His growing tally of kills, his calm under pressure, and his analytical approach to battle had transformed him into a symbol of American precision and resolve. The rise of a master. On July 26, 1943, Bong's transformation from ace to legend was sealed. That morning, he led a flight of 10 P-38 Lightnings over Papua New Guinea, scanning the sky for trouble. They found 20 Japanese aircraft flying in tight formation. Every rule of tactics said wait for reinforcements. Bong ignored the rule book. He dove straight into the heart of the formation, the twin engines howling like thunder. His first burst of gunfire tore apart 2 enemy planes almost instantly. As he climbed to reposition, 15 more Japanese fighters swooped in to reinforce the engagement. The odds now, nearly 4 to 1, would have terrified most pilots. Bong simply smiled into his oxygen mask and went back for more. What followed was textbook aerial dominance. Bong struck from above, then vanished below, firing only when every variable aligned. When the battle ended, 10 Japanese aircraft were destroyed, 4 by Bong himself, with with not a single American loss. His wingman reported afterward that he never wasted ammunition, never lost focus, never hesitated. For his heroism, Bong received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for valor. Among the Japanese who survived that fight was Lieutenant Kenji Okamoto, a Zero pilot who recorded his terror in a diary entry discovered decades later. We met the American twin-boom fighter flown by the pilot. Our intelligence calls the ghost. He strikes from impossible angles. Our leaders warn us, if you see the one with red wingtips, disengage. But he decides when the battle begins and when it ends. By August, Bong's kill count had reached 15. He was promoted to captain and had become a household name across the Pacific. Yet behind his modest smile, Bong remained focused on improvement, not fame. Learning, teaching, perfecting every mission was a lesson. He reviewed gun camera footage frame by frame, not to admire himself, but to calculate angles, distances, corrections. He noticed a pattern. His most efficient kills came within 100 yards, often half that distance. At that range, misses were nearly impossible. His average burst lasted less than 3 seconds, a model of efficiency and discipline. Unlike many aces, Bong refused to chase crippled enemies or follow them into traps. He disengaged when odds turned bad, and he never lost a wingman. In an era when countless pilots died covering their leaders, Bong's reputation for protecting his partners became legendary. He treated us as equals. One of his wingmen later recalled, he'd take the shot only if it was safe for both of us. That's why we'd follow him anywhere. By November 1943, after nearly a year of continuous combat, General George Kenney decided Bong had earned a reprieve. The young ace had already given the 5th Air Force more victories than anyone could have hoped. Kenney ordered him home on leave both to rest and to serve a higher purpose. Kenney knew the value of heroes. The American public, weary of grim headlines, needed symbols of courage and victory, and none fit better than a soft-spoken farm boy who had humbled Japan's finest home-front hero back in Superior, Wisconsin. Bong returned as a celebrity. Newspapers called him America's greatest fighter pilot. Radio stations fought for interviews. Even Life magazine devoted pages to his story. But Bong was uncomfortable with fame. "I'm just doing my job," he told reporters, his smile shy, his voice steady. It was during that leave that he met Marjorie Vattendahl, a college student whose grace and intelligence captivated him instantly. Their connection was immediate to Midwestern souls who understood simplicity and sincerity. When Bong returned to duty in January 1944, he carried a large photograph of her, which he had affixed to the nose of his P-38. From then on, his aircraft bore her name, Marge. Unlike the racy pin-ups favored by many pilots, Bong's nose art showed Marge fully clothed, smiling warmly, a reflection of his character. The red-tipped wings and propeller spinners made Marge instantly recognizable, and soon Japanese pilots were warned, if you see the lightning with red markings and a woman's face on the nose, run tragically. In March 1944, another pilot flying Marge on a weather mission suffered engine failure and crashed in the mountains of Papua New Guinea. The wreck disappeared into the jungle, lost for decades. Bong mourned her loss quietly, then transferred Marge's photo to a new P-38, vowing to keep her spirit with him every time he took to the sky. By April 1944, Bong's official count reached 27 confirmed kills, surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26. Rickenbacker himself sent a letter of congratulations. "You have achieved what I always hoped another American pilot would. You have become the best of the best." The Army Air Forces promoted Bong to Major, and the War Department turned him into a national figurehead. He was ordered to tour the United States, selling war bonds and inspiring morale. He traveled from state to state, visiting factories, hospitals, and training bases. Workers paused their machines to hear him speak. Veterans saluted him. Newspapers covered his every move, but Bong hated the attention. "I belong in a cockpit, not on a stage," he wrote to Marge. "My friends are still out there fighting while I make speeches. Every day away from them feels like betrayal." Despite his discomfort, the tour achieved its goal. Bong's sales soared wherever he appeared. Factories boosted production. His modesty, far more than bravado, inspired those who met him. To America, he was proof that quiet determination could triumph over impossible odds. The reluctant legend returns by September 1944. General Kenney summoned Bong back to the Pacific, but this time under special conditions. Bong's fame had made him too valuable to lose. Officially, he was assigned as gunnery instructor at 5th Air Force Headquarters. Unofficially, he was allowed to fly limited missions, so long as he didn't deliberately seek combat. Bong, of course, found a loophole. "They said I couldn't look for trouble," he joked. "They never said I couldn't shoot if trouble found me." Stationed at Leyte in the Philippines, he flew frequent patrols under the pretense of instruction. Japanese resistance was fierce but fading, and Bong's skill remained unmatched. His victories mounted, 28, each kill verified by film and witnesses. By late 1944, Japanese air power was collapsing, replaced by desperate kamikaze attacks. Bong's disciplined flying style made him uniquely effective at intercepting suicide planes before they reached Allied ships. His gun camera footage told the story of a man who had turned killing into geometry 3-second bursts at close range, followed by clean disengagement. As Bong approached 40 kills, both General Kenny and General Douglas MacArthur knew the time had come. The risk of losing America's ace of aces outweighed the potential for further victories. They decided he would soon be brought home for good, but not before one final honor. On December 12, 1944, at Leyte's Dulag Airfield, General MacArthur himself pinned the Medal of Honor to Bong's chest. Discarding his usual theatrics, MacArthur spoke plainly. "Major Richard Ira Bong, who has ruled the air from New Guinea to the Philippines, I now induct you into the company of the bravest of the brave." Photographs captured the moment. MacArthur in his khakis and sunglasses, Bong standing rigid, uncomfortable with the adulation. The ceremony appeared in newsreels across the nation. To America, he was now officially the ace of aces. 5 days later, on December 17, 1944, Bong scored his 40th and final aerial victory, shooting down a Japanese fighter over the Philippines with his signature precision, a 3-second burst. Perfect alignment, clean escape. His superiors agreed it was enough. 40 confirmed kills, the Medal of Honor, and a record unmatched in U.S. history. Bong would be sent home not as a casualty, but as a living legend. While Major Richard Ira Bong returned to the United States in January 1945, he came home as America's most decorated fighter pilot. 40 aerial victories, a Medal of Honor, and a legend already sealed in the national imagination. But to those who knew him best, Bong remained the same quiet, soft-spoken man from northern Wisconsin, who preferred hangers to microphones. The newspapers hailed his return with bold headlines. Radio stations called him the ace of aces. Life magazine featured him smiling shyly beside his P-38 Lightning, his medal gleaming in the sun. For a nation still locked in war, Bong's name was more than a record. It was reassurance, proof that skill, courage, and patience could triumph even against impossible odds. But what America wanted most was a love story, and Bong, at last, could tell one. Love and normalcy. On February 10, 1945, in a small Lutheran church in Superior, Wisconsin, Richard Bong married Marjorie Vattendahl, the woman whose photograph had adorned his fighter's nose throughout his Pacific campaigns. The ceremony was modest, yet filled with warmth. Bong wore his Army Air Forces uniform, the Medal of Honor pinned neatly to his chest. Marge walked down the aisle in white satin, radiant and composed. The pews overflowed with family, friends, neighbors, and reporters who chronicled every moment for newspapers eager for good news. For the first time in years, Bong allowed himself to imagine peace, a home, a family, a life untouched by the roar of engines and the staccato of gunfire. He promised Marge a future built not in the sky, but on the ground they both called home. The newlyweds honeymooned in California, where Bong had accepted a position as a test pilot for Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. It was a natural fit. Few pilots understood the nuances of flight like Bong, and his calm analytical mind made him perfect for testing new aircraft. His assignment, to help evaluate the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. To Bong, it was another adventure, a chance to shape the next era of aviation. He was no longer fighting enemies but pushing the boundaries of technology. The P-80 represented the future, sleek, fast, and revolutionary, but it was also unpredictable. Early jet engines were notoriously unreliable, and procedures were still being developed through dangerous trial and error. The final flight in the morning of August 6, 1945, Bong arrived at Lockheed's Burbank Airfield for what was supposed to be a routine acceptance. Flight of P-80A serial number 448-5048. had logged just over 4 hours in the new jet, enough to feel confident, though still cautious. At 2:30 p.m., the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted gracefully into the California sky. Witnesses saw the jet climb to a few hundred feet before dark smoke began to stream from its tail. The engine faltered, then flamed out completely. Bong jettisoned the canopy and ejected, but the altitude was too low. His parachute deployed only partially before he struck the ground at the corner of Oxnard Street and Satsuma Avenue, less than a mile from the airfield. He was killed instantly. Moments later, the aircraft crashed and exploded nearby. The official investigation determined that the primary fuel pump had failed. A backup pump could have restored power, but activating it required flipping a switch on the left console, a task that, in those final chaotic seconds, may have been impossible. Another test pilot later recalled that Bong had once admitted forgetting to activate the auxiliary pump during an earlier flight. "You only need to forget once," the pilot said quietly. Bong was 24 years old. The news broke the next morning, August 7, 1945, appearing on front pages, directly beside the story of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. The cruel irony was inescapable. The man who had survived 3 years of deadly combat against Japan had perished, testing a new American aircraft on the very day the weapon that ended that war was unleashed. A nation in mourning, country grieved as though it had lost a brother. In Poplar, Wisconsin, flags flew at half-staff. Thousands lined the roads as Bong's casket, draped in the American flag, made its way to the small cemetery near his childhood home. General George Kenney, his wartime commander, attended the funeral personally. Standing beside the grave, the grizzled general struggled to contain his grief. He gave everything he had to this country. He said softly. Marge, only 21 years old, walked behind the casket with quiet dignity. The marriage that had promised a lifetime had lasted less than 6 months. She never spoke publicly of her husband's final day without emotion in her eyes. Dick survived every danger the Japanese threw at him. She would later say, "He came home to me, and then he was gone. I'll never understand why." Legacy of the Asto Bong's life ended abruptly. His influence only deepened with time. The tactics he developed, energy fighting, altitude advantage, and disciplined boom and zoom attacks, became standard instruction for generations of fighter pilots. His insistence on precision over bravado transformed the culture of aerial combat. Even his enemies respected him. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the war with 64 kills, later described the terror the P-38 Lightning inspired. "The Lightning could dive from heights we could not reach and strike before we even saw it. The American pilot with the red-tipped wings chose when and where to fight. The Zero could no longer rule the air." Bong's record remains untouched: 40 confirmed victories, over 200 combat missions, more than 500 hours in enemy skies, and not a single wingman lost under his leadership. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 7 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 15 Air Medals, 27 decorations in total. Yet to those who flew with him, his legacy wasn't measured in medals, but in lives saved by his mentorship and his example, enduring memory in the decades that followed. The small town of Superior, Wisconsin, became the keeper of his memory. The local airport was renamed Richard I Bong Airport, and the Richard Bong Veterans Historical Center opened nearby, displaying his uniforms, medals, and a restored P-38 Lightning painted in his colors. A high school room was turned into a living memorial. Roads, bridges, and parks across America now bear his name. In 1986, Bong was posthumously inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. At the ceremony, his old comrade Colonel Gerald Johnson spoke through tears. "Dick Bong was the finest pilot I ever knew, but that's not why we honor him. We honor him because he made everyone around him better. He showed us that courage is not recklessness, and that preparation wins wars." Nearly 80 years later, his story found a new chapter. In May 2024, an expedition from the Bong Veterans Historical Center and Pacific Rex located the long-lost remains of his first P-38. Marge, deep within a ravine in Papua New Guinea's Madang province. The engines were still recognizable, the propeller tips faintly red beneath the soil. Bong's sister, Geraldine Jeriva, then 99, expressed quiet joy. "It feels like a piece of him has finally come home." The measure of a man, Major Richard Ira Bong's record, may never be broken. The evolution of jet warfare, missiles, and beyond visual range combat has made such achievements impossible. Yet his name endures as a reminder of a different era, when battles were fought eye to eye, when survival depended on intellect as much as instinct, and when one man's discipline could alter the course of a war. His wife Marge, who later remarried and became Marge Dutchin, devoted her life to preserving that legacy. She helped found the Bong Heritage Center, and often spoke to students about the importance of remembering the ordinary people who performed extraordinary deeds. Late in her life, she wrote, "Dick always said we were just doing our job. That's what all those young men were doing, their job. The least we can do is keep telling their stories." And so his story endures, of a boy who looked up at male planes over a Wisconsin farm and decided he belonged among them. Of a man who entered war not seeking glory but understanding. Of a pilot whose calm precision and fierce integrity changed the very nature of air combat. Major Richard Ira Bong, the quiet ace from Poplar, remains not merely the most successful fighter pilot in American history, but the embodiment of what the country believed itself to be at its best: brave, modest, relentless, and true.